I keep losing my thing. Okay, there we go. All right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. We are now live with our Diversity Roundtable. I am Dr. Davis, and we have a lovely panelist here today with us to talk about advocacy. A lot has been going on in the world, and there are a number of voices that have been lifted. And so we thought this would be an ideal space to feel with a conversation on advocacy, its challenges, its barriers, our wins, our successes. And we have some excellent panelists who are here to speak about their lived experience, their day-to-day experiences. And we welcome any questions, comments in our chat section. And so feel free to speak on that. But before we dig into our amazing panel, I would like to go ahead and set the stage for our conversation today, okay? So as I said, I'm Dr. Davis, and this is our live stream, and it's intended to be more of an educational content. And so because of that, it's not intended to replace therapy, but for those who are in need of support, know that for treatment-related questions, you can work with your local provider on contacting a local clinician. The IOCDF is not a crisis hotline. It should not be used as such. However, if you are in crisis or you're feeling like you're in any need, if anything is triggered in this space, you feel unsafe, please go to your local emergency room, call 911, or call the Suicide Prevention Hotline at 1-800-273-8255. We also want to make sure that we create as safe space as possible. And so because of that, again, we welcome any feedback, any comments, any experiences, and we agree on this panel, as well as in this space, to be kind and respectful to one another. And with that, this is going to be a broadcast. This is actually going to be broadcast on various social media platforms, and it's being recorded. So we'll ask that you're very mindful about what you choose to share, as we have no control over kind of where it lands, where it finds itself. But know again that this is a safe space, and at the end of the day, we are all here to support one another. So with that being our disclaimer, and we set that platform, I would like to go ahead and get started and welcome everybody to our roundtable. So in line with OCD's mission of fostering a hopeful and supportive community for those affected by OCD and the professionals who treat them, I would also add family members and loved ones to that. And those affected by OCD, I would like to welcome you to today's roundtable discussion on advocacy and lifting every voice. So I would like to start, if it's okay with our panelists, by go ahead and introducing yourselves, and you can tell me a little bit about yourself, what kind of advocacy work that you do, and something interesting that you think might connect well with our listeners. And by the way, there is no order. I can like point at the little squares in the screen if you want me to. If not, you guys can just jump on in.
Oh, I thought I heard Alex. Go ahead, Alex.
Oh, really, Ethan? This is going to be fun, as y'all can tell.
I was muted too. Okay.
Hi, Alex.
My name is Alexandra, and I am currently an OCD advocate. I have also worked and still do some work in the domestic violence advocacy arena. I am a stay-at-home mother to a now 3-year-old. So that is what I do now. I used to study psychology and work as a domestic violence victim advocate. I am very passionate about women's rights, mental health in general, and especially lifting up the most marginalized populations.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you, Alex. Who would like to go next?
Okay, I'll go. My name is Ethan Smith. I'm a national advocate for the International OCD Foundation. And so my mission in life is to advocate for OCD, to make it, as we all are, that's what we're here, right? For the common goals of education, accessibility, affordability, and efficacy of treatment, to make sure that's available to all. So that is obviously a mission coming from a place of being born with OCD and having life-changing treatment in 2010. By trade, I'm a writer, director, and a producer, and coming to you live from Los Angeles, where I am currently working on projects for OCD, which is awesome that advocacy combines with creativity to get the word out there. And so, yeah, that's what I'm up to. And that is me in a nutshell. I'm also 6'7", but I'm sitting down and you can't tell that. So
Are you saying that to be funny?
Yes.
Thank you, Ethan. We're definitely going
Welcome.
to come back to Alex's her advocacy in the space of domestic violence and mental health. And for you, I like this phrase you left with, advocacy and creativity. We're definitely going to come back to that. I like that. I want to hear more about that. All right, Mimi, you're up.
Hi, I'm Mimi. I am currently a second-year graduate student in mental health counseling, and so I work at a facility-based treatment center for kids right now. And I really love social media. I love Instagram and writing about OCD and eating disorders mostly. And I have had experiences with both. And so, yeah, I'm trying to think. I'm in North Carolina. That's about it.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. Just for the sake of the audience, we might have someone join in with us a little bit later. So I'll just kind of grab them in if they do decide to pop up, but I don't want you all to be alarmed. And so moving into kind of what brings us here today, I wanted to share with you all a little bit more about the agreements of the roundtable. So if you've never heard of a roundtable, if you don't know what it is, a traditional discussion on diversity from a roundtable perspective centers awareness. But what we decided to do with this particular roundtable was go beyond just sharing information and giving context and content and promoting more of a dialogue about diversity, inclusivity, and making it about action. So we're doing more around action-oriented topics where we're talking about practice, we're talking about changing, we're talking about doing. And so that's why this was the perfect platform to do so. Because if you heard all of the things that these amazing panelists have done and will continue to do, you know it centers around action. So I came up with a list of questions because if I'm a therapist by trade, I'm a clinical psychologist. I treat and research OCD specifically in the Black community. And so if you know anything about the treatment of or working with OCD, you know, CBT, you come in with your, so I always have an agenda because I was trained appropriately, but that does not mean we won't let it flow because we know OCD gets creative and you start finding some interesting things and then you got to evolve. So you got to be able to move with it. So that's what we're going to do in our conversation. We'll do kind of a round table. You all jump in and let your personality flow, share about your experiences. But there are always agreements in our roundtable, okay? And these agreements are, number one, we agree to hold a space where differing perspectives are respected. We agree to model effective ways to have difficult dialogue around topics of diversity. And we agree to take action steps towards enacting change. And with those agreements, this is how we exist in this space and come up with ideas and dialogue around ideas to enact that change that we want to see moving from this. So, panelists, if you had to say there was one thing that has stood out about your advocacy experience, what would you say it's been? And I know that's broad, but it's like, boom, this is going to open a door. What would you say?
I would definitely say the first thing that comes to mind is taboo themes of OCD being like people being like, that's not okay to think about. And it's just really frustrating because it's not the same thing. I'm specifically thinking about pedophilia, OCD. And it's just really sad to see so many people suffering and so much shame around that.
And you said something that's important, right? So if we're thinking about advocacy, we're thinking about action. Ethan said, he threw like all the important words out there: education, accessibility, efficacy, affordability. And what comes to mind with you was the education. So oftentimes you have folks suffering because of lack of education of other folks, right? So who wants to jump in on that part? Because Mimi laid a great foundation.
I'll do it. So for me, what actually stands out the most is not so much the lack of education, although there is lack of education in certain populations, right? Especially. So in the Black population and the Latino population, I'm thinking of my people, BIPOC in general, Asian Americans, there is not only a lack of education, but a lack of research. And that's what has stood out to me the most, that in trying to educate myself as an advocate, because that's part of what we do, so I can educate others in marginalized communities, I'm finding that there's a severe lack of information.
I think the third point to that is a lack of education within the clinical community as well. I think that's important to point out, as you have, for those of us that have been through the sort of 10 to 17 years of diagnosis to treatment experience and been to 10 or 15 therapists that said they knew how to treat OCD, but they don't. You sort of determine where that happens, right? In that sort of graduate master's level, half-day abnormal psychology. Okay, I can treat OCD now. Why aren't we, and we are to some extent, but why isn't there a bigger push to educate at that level to say, if you want to specialize in treating this particular mental illness, here are the steps to go do that?
Sure. No, so I think you all covered the gamut. You've covered the day-to-day lived experiences, you've covered the research aspect, you've covered the clinical aspect. And honestly, this is the conversation around the advocacy efforts, right? So one of the questions I sent you all was, what was your advocacy catalyst? And it seems like you all just spoke to that, like the lack of knowledge that exists in all three parts of our OCD community. And what's not represented is our family aspect, which I hope, that can be represented in some way. But if any of you have any ideas or thoughts about that lived experience, that would be great to share here at this space, because I think that's another component of this, right? That support that exists in this space. And it's oftentimes not only those who have received treatment with OCD, but those who are, providing services, but those who live with folks. Advocacy is sprouting out from all of these arenas. So what would you say was the catalyst? And also, if you have anything to share about the family dynamics, please feel free to share. What's the catalyst? What's the boom? What's the explosion?
Yeah, I can jump in, but with the standing rule that interrupt me at any time, because I'll always jump in. So please interrupt me. I mean, there's two things that come to mind. On the family side, I can definitely say that, without my family, I would not be alive, and that's a true story. And I say that because I was fortunate enough that when I finally found treatment and therapy, 17 years after diagnosis at the age of 31, my therapists at that time engaged my parents in treatment and engaged them and taught them how to respond to my OCD, taught them what they had been doing that wasn't helpful for OCD. And really, it was because OCD is a family disorder, especially if you were living with family members. My parents weren't married to each other. They were married to my OCD, right? Yeah. Even as an adult. And so by doing that and them learning what they had to do, when push came to shove and it was time to make really hard, difficult decisions as a parent, they were able to make those decisions that at the time seemed horrific for a parent, but turns out was the best thing they could have done for me, and my OCD. Real quickly, simply the catalyst for me was very simple. From the beginning, it was, I don't want anybody else to go through what I went through. And that was true when I was sick and never thought I would get better. That was true the day I got better and was like, I want to do something about that. And that remains true now, is I don't want anybody to go through what I went through. So that remains the spark for me that continue to move my purpose forward in life through advocacy.
Yeah, wow. That's powerful. Who wants to tag onto that?
I'll jump in. So offering a little bit of a differing perspective from Ethan, and Diosito perdóname, because I'm about to get a little vulnerable here. And my family may not like it, but unfortunately for me, that family aspect was not there. And they were actually an obstacle to my treatment. So in Latino culture, when you are raised as a first generation, Latinx or Hispanic, there's a lot of kind of taboo around therapy and around accessing treatment. We are supposed to go to church or to go to our elders to talk about these things. And a lot of times, when you're talking about intrusive thoughts and things, they tell you, well, you're possessed, or you need to pray harder because you're having these thoughts because you're a bad person, which, is very terrible. And so I spent my teen years and my early 20s thinking that I was a bad person and that I was probably possessed and that I shouldn't go to church because of all those things. So when I finally did get treatment, I just kept it to myself. It was a very personal, very secret me thing. My husband now is very supportive, and he's my biggest cheerleader with ERP. So I would say education for the family, especially Latino, Hispanic families, and other families in a collectivist culture, is so important. We need to make psychoeducation more inclusive and find a way to draw these people in because it's necessary for the patients.
Excellent point. So not only did you tap into how it sounds like there was some advocacy just for your own individual existence, right? That you had to do with your family. You talk about the need for how expanding from a systems perspective, how we're looking at the clinical work, the community work, involving other perspectives to really enhance that psychoeducation. That seems to be the word of the day already. Psychoeducation. We got to teach you. Well, I'm sorry. I threw in psychoeducation. That's my clinical brain. I'm sorry. It was like automatic. But the education, getting the information out there, increasing knowledge. How would you jump in on that, Mimi?
Yeah, I'm pretty similar to Ethan in the catalyst side, in that I remember when I was in high school at the worst of it, thinking if I find a way out of this, I'm going to tell other people how to as well, because it's so debilitating and it just feels so terrible. Family-wise, I think what everyone said is really important. It's hard in Black families as well, I think, who also do church. And so, yeah, I think that's all I'll say on that. But
yeah. When Alice was talking, I was thinking in my head, yeah, sounds like us Black folks too. So it does. It does. Like, you're not praying hard enough. If you're depressed, you're not praying hard enough. It's like, God also gave us all this PhD that I earned. So we're going to take that clinical support that I'm going to get. God gave me that too. You're so welcome. Thank you. So yes. So if I'm hearing a theme, and Alex, I don't know if I caught your catalyst. And if you want to chime in after this, that would be great. If I can tackle the theme right now, it's really more of like, I don't want to see anybody else go through this. So that's my motivation for advocacy. Alex, and obviously that's a spectrum, right? There are different motivators, and I'm going to bring that up, but I would love to hear from you, Alex. What's your motivation?
Yeah, so my motivation was twofold, and it kind of started at the beginning of this pandemic. I actually started watching Ethan on live streams because I felt so alone, and I just did not know what to do. And then I kind of started from there digging into pages on Instagram and stuff. And where I really got motivated was when I said, there is a whole aspect of Latinos, Hispanic living in the United States who are not being represented as much in the OCD community. And so I said, well, let me just throw up a little page and see what happened. And it blew up. It went from there.
It definitely tends to. That's a thing that kind of got at my experience as well. I started off in the clinical work, doing the research. I was a graduate student at the University of Louisville, and that was our research lab. And it took a specific lens in the Black community. And so from there, I started looking around to the point that Alex made. It's like, there is literally no research. Like, Monica Williams was the person who did the research that we use even to this day for Black people. And so because of that, I kind of also took on that thing that Ethan said. It's like, I don't want another Black person to have to exist in this space and not feel validated. So I don't know if everyone can hear like this other thing that's coming out, but it becomes, your advocacy seems to come from within. It's this acknowledgement of something that is lacking, right? There's a void, there's a gap, there's a space that needs to be filled, and you just decide you're going to do it. So if you all could really speak to what, and I got a sense of like, what was the thing that was the catalyst, but like, what would you say, or how would you describe you actually going into action? Like, describe that experience for me. I would love to hear that, because I think there are a number of people in the audience, in the world, who are sitting on ideas, who are motivated, who feel the same way we do. Like, we just can't keep not having stuff. and it's in living rooms, it's in PTA meetings, it's in clinics, right? It's in support groups, it's in Instagram sections. So let's talk about like what that looks like, what that sounded like for you all. Like, what was the thing that you were like, I'm just going to do it? Tell me about that experience.
I think it's a really frustrating experience sometimes being an advocate. So I'll tie both OCD and eating disorders, but people ask me about my clinical interests and I'll say OCD and eating disorders, and they usually talk about their diet or how they're organized. And it's just really annoying to have to explain over and over.
It's so true.
And it's like, that's not even remotely correct. But
they don't know.
like, it's just crazy. But I started off on Instagram sharing posts because I just saw other people who were kind of talking about these issues. But at the time, I didn't really know too many accounts or anything. I think I knew like 2 or 3. And so I really wanted to share my perspective, especially with scrupulosity. That wasn't really talked about as much. And so I was really interested in some of the themes that I experienced that maybe some other people might relate to.
Wonderful. And I will repeat back something that I think is super important, that for those folks who are sitting on the couch and trying to figure out what to do, guess what? You don't need a degree. You don't need to wait on anything. All you need is to have a perspective. And what Mimi said was, I just want to share my perspective. And I started looking around and I noticed that my perspective wasn't out there. And the beautiful thing that we have that generations before us didn't have is we have a platform that is social media. And we get to share. And if you remember what Alex said, she was like, I was sitting in COVID and I couldn't find anybody. So where did she go? Social media. And we're going to hear from Ethan about his amazing, huge platform, but he's at another level, right? Because he put that advocacy and creativity together. And I'm just going to be honest, I'm not there either. But I will add one more piece before we transition to someone else. I would like to point out that advocacy is not about comfort. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be fun. And I know that because Mimi said it was frustrating. It is very frustrating. And so that's why it's really important to know what your catalyst is and what you're fighting for, because you will likely get tired. But I wanted to make that point that she simply started out just by sharing posts. It was just that. I want my perspective out there and I'm just going to quick repost. And then I'm going to take some screenshots and add some more letters and put that out there. That's what she did. I just want y'all to hear that. So, all right, who's up next?
I'll go before Ethan blows me out of the water.
I know.
Oh my God.
I can't go after you, Ethan.
I'm so glad
Y'all are
I'm
incredible.
I'm glad I'm just a facilitator. I don't have to do nothing, you know?
Exactly. So yeah, I think that with advocacy sometimes, and with anything really in life, the only difference between you doing something and somebody else doing something is just the person who literally took the first step to do it, or asked a question, or approached somebody with an idea. So it was really about sitting aside all of my OCD and, my social anxiety and embracing uncertainty and taking that first step to put myself out there. And once I put myself out there and saw that there was a need for it, that people responded, then that emboldened me to take the next step and look for volunteer opportunities. And I actually landed on the IOCDF. So I do the bulk of my advocacy work with them. And it has been a wonderful experience. And I think once you kind of get going, you just look for that next opportunity. You stop being afraid of no, because no is it's just a word. If someone turns me down, that's okay. But at least I'm fighting for my values.
Yes. And you are represented. And that's another thing I heard. But I would like to point out one thing that I think in comparison to Mimi, you make an excellent point. That so maybe you're not the one to create your own content, right? Because I'm not as creative as Mimi, right? That's why I don't create my own posts. But there are a number of platforms through IOCDF, through support groups, through local and nationally sponsored groups and programs where your voice, your experience, you showing up, a body is very, very helpful. We know that change comes in numbers. Sometimes it's as simple as adding your name to some type of legislative advocacy part, right? Like it literally can look like that. You may not be the content media or the content creator person. You may not be the person who knows how to navigate and find, and you may feel uncomfortable because, as we said, Alex, she had to embrace her uncertainty. We know that that's hard. This is the OCD space. Uncertainty is not our friend. So we know that. So, just because you're not able to get over it in that space, or, you don't feel like you're creative enough like Ethan and Mimi, like create all this great platform, you can literally just go join another group. And I'm sure, even if not today, at some point we can highlight some of the advocacy opportunities that are available through IOCDF. I know we didn't have a physical convention, but I know that a lot of my advocacy work and my participation in volunteer work was as a student at the conference, where I introduced folks and, I helped pass out pamphlets and stuff like that. So there's work to be done everywhere. It's just a matter of being able to find it. And sometimes, again, you don't have to rely on yourself. There are whole communities, but don't feel like you have to have a plan or it has to be a certain way. Like, there are ways. All right, so Ethan, you're up. We got to let him go last. Right, y'all?
Oh, stop. My God. Y'all are amazing. I'm lucky to be here. So, no, the first thing was, and I relate to what Mimi said, which is when I got better and learned about OCD through the therapy and treatment itself, I went, oh, that's interesting. My OCD isn't like anybody else's OCD that I hear about. So, I'd like to scream from the rooftops. Yes. What my experience was that it's debilitating, that I wasn't able to function, that I was physically ill because I was mentally ill, that my parents had to take care of me, that I wasn't hand washing, that I wasn't checking, that I wasn't, yes. And those are just as painful. Never want to minimize yes. those. But regardless, mine looked different. And why wasn't it being spoken about? And so that made me want to scream about it. And I'm still screaming about it. And then I learned about further taboo, subtypes and symptoms of OCD that are only taboo because the public isn't talking about them. When the research shows that sexual violent intrusive is probably more prevalent, it's just less spoken about.
Yep.
That's right. For me, advocacy took on a different form because, I'm old and, Instagram wasn't a thing yet. Facebook was, and I had a lot of followers on MySpace, but that was gone. But no, the reality of it is for me, and I've said this before, advocacy boils down to sharing your story with someone else. That's what it is for me. It may not be for you, but it is for me. And I had a few aha moments within this realm that really penetrated my heart and soul and made me want to move forward as an advocate on a bigger scale. The first one was I'd been to a conference when I was really ill. I knew about the conference and I knew I wanted to speak at one when I got better. But even before then, I just went to go visit where I had got one of the clinics where I had gotten exposure response prevention therapy. And I was sitting in the waiting room and I was talking to a mother and a son that were there for treatment. And he was in the midst of his own hell. Mm-hmm. And I started telling my story and just seeing his face, learning he wasn't alone, the things that he related to in terms of symptomatology or just experience or parental relationship, watching his face change, I immediately went, oh, I need to be doing this. And I need to be doing this really, really loudly. The second time it happened was in 2014. I went to the OCDI at McLean. This was after I'd given the keynote speech in 2014 at the conference. And I did this because I had spent the holidays at the OCDI McLean. And it's not fun. And I love OCDI and they know they're great, but who wants to be in a psychiatric hospital, be it it's not locked during the holidays? It's not fun. So I was going to go, I was going to go there and I was going to visit and spend Christmas Eve and Christmas Day with the in-unit patients and just hang out. Right. And I had a conversation with a young woman there and I shared my story and she shared hers and the impact that her story had on me. But then she ended her story with, I can never be like you. I could never change a life. And I was like, you just did. Like, I will never forget your story. You will always hold me accountable for my actions, moving forward. And you are the greatest of advocates. And it was in that moment I realized that advocacy is really just sharing your story. And it can be with one person or millions of people or anywhere you want. And social media is one avenue to do that. It's your own soapbox. You can create your own universe, which is awesome. But there are so many other places to advocate. And it really is, what speaks to you? What are you passionate about? And what do you want to talk about? And as Dr. Davis said, also, it's not about being comfortable. It doesn't mean it should make you miserable, but it's also not about being comfortable either. And I think that was a great point as well. So that's my story.
And I will close out with your story on it's rewarding. If I've heard anything from the panelists, I've heard that it's fulfilling. It's rewarding. And it didn't sound like you sought out to get that. By no means. Like it came from a space of giving. It came from a space of sharing. But it sounds like it gives just as much as you give, right?
Yeah, I will tell you. Sorry, Darlene, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I will tell you, and I've said this multiple times, that, Dr. Janicki, who's an amazing doctor, told me early on. I mean, this was when I was sick and at the OCD. He said the best thing you can do for your OCD is help others. And I didn't understand that at the time because I was sick and I literally had the mentality like, others, I need the help. I messed up. What do you mean others? I don't care about anyone else. Fix me. That was literally my mentality. But the reality is advocacy is another A word. It's accountability. And I know for me that I'm not going to come on every week and speak to individuals with OCD and their families if I'm not at least doing my best to walk the walk. Doesn't mean I'm not going to be perfect. Doesn't mean that I'm not going to compulse. Doesn't mean that I'm going to not have rough days, weeks, or months. But it is going to mean that I'm going to try, because I'm not going to show up and not do what I'm asking other people to do. Yep. So for me, it's about accountability. And not only does it help, not as only as advocacy, but it helps keep me well. And it's probably one of the most powerful ways I can stay better in my phase of maintenance and management. So for me, it's accountability too.
I see heads shaking down there. You all are at the bottom. So I feel like somebody wants to say something else.
I do. I want to say something. First of all, I agree. Nothing has lit a fire under my butt more than being an advocate to really, really, truly get my recovery in order, to be the best I can be, and to, as Ethan put it, walk the walk, because there is no way that I can be in a healthy space to advocate and be a role model without taking care of myself. And that is something that is a wonderful gift that advocacy has given to me. And I didn't realize it was going to be such an amazing, benefit. So not only am I getting to help other people, but I'm actually helping myself. And that is wonderful. And to another point that Ethan made, advocacy is not just on social media. It's not just online. It's not just with the IOCDF. Sometimes the best place we can start advocacy is at home and with the people that we know. The people who are primed the most to listen to us, even if they don't agree right away, are the people closest to us in our lives. And if we exercise patience, compassion, and we are tenacious in trying to get them to listen and understand, we will turn them into our best advocates, and then they will go out and spread that message to others. And that is how we start to affect change.
Did you want to add anything, Mimi?
I was just going to say that it's really interesting, like moments where I'll hear a clip of a podcast I've done, or maybe I've been quoted in something, and then I read it and I'm like, oh, am I supposed to take that advice? Because I sure didn't give it out to other people. Or even when I'm about to write a post and I'm like, gosh, I don't know if I should write that, because I don't really know if I can do that.
I love the transparency. I love it. I love all the transparency that has happened here. Because to Ethan's point, there is some accountability there. And I heard you all speaking about yourself, but then Alex gave us a nice segue to pointing this arrow outward, right? So when most people think about advocacy, they think about us making requests or demands, right, of a community, a system, an institution, something like that, right? So I would love to hear you all speak to something like that, where you've been engaged in some type of advocacy away from you that was out into focusing, community focused or institutional, an institution you wanted to enact change through, something like that, and speak to the successes. We get small wins with advocacy, but then we want to be honest about the challenges, right? So speak to both of those if you don't mind.
I'll jump in for this one. I created an online course for clinicians to understand ERP and OCD. And so I'm really proud of that. It went okay. Like people were interested, but it's a hard topic to learn. I think, at least in my experience in grad school, I've never heard the words ERP. And so, yeah, I think that's my interaction with other people. It's nice to hear that they're learning and accumulating that education, because sometimes like a whole training on ERP might be a little bit like hard to do a lot of. But I hope that this course is helpful for people to get like an introduction, because they're already working with people with OCD. It's just that they're not really trained in the ERP piece.
No, to your point, right? Ethan made that point earlier about accessibility. That's actually my platform as well. I specifically, a lot of our research, a lot of my work, and I don't know that I call it advocacy. I guess it falls under advocacy, but to me, it's about removing barriers to effective treatments, right? Evidence-based effective treatments in the Black community. As Alex has talked about, the marginalized community, we know that just generally OCD treatment is already delayed. So then you add onto that the barriers that exist around healthcare in the Black community, and you just go ahead and make it worse, right? There aren't very many Black clinicians. They're very different conversations about OCD in the Black community, right? So talk about misdiagnosis, undiagnosed, just the manifestation, the comorbidity of OCD and other things, and how it just kind of just nestles its way under something else, right? Because we know OCD is tricky. So because of that, right, I do think it's important for us to have a conversation about what those challenges are. And I think to your point, I think it's powerful that your advocacy came in this form, because that I wouldn't have thought of that. I wouldn't have thought of how, while it fits under the umbrella of accessibility, like I didn't think to approach the clinician. Now it's very interesting because I am the clinician that you're talking about, but I had the privilege of being trained in EXRP or ERP in grad school. Like that was our lab, that was our training. That's what we did. So I came out of grad school with this training. So I guess that just kind of completely missed me, but I think it's beautiful because there are so many clinicians who are capable. There are so many limited license or master's level clinicians who are capable, and yet it's not available. So kudos to you, Mimi. All right.
Thanks.
So who else is jumping in there? Institutions and communities.
Ethan, I was going to let you, but I'll go first.
No, I'm happy. Totally up to you.
Go ahead, Ethan. Go ahead.
I never have anything to say.
Never.
No, go ahead, Alex.
Go ahead.
The institution for me, the community for me, that's a hard question for me to answer. Okay. And that's okay. Because for me, it's always been community first. That's how I operate. That's how I want to be. That's my mission. And that's how it is. And the IOCDF has provided a platform, and an amazing platform for me to be community first. And I'm eternally grateful for all of the effort and time they have put into me. And I've learned so much from them. But also, like, for me, accessibility, even with the IOCDF, was important. I think that nonprofits as a whole don't necessarily always feel accessible to individuals that are struggling. And when I came on board, I really didn't want the IOCDF to ever feel that way to our community and to people that needed help. I wanted to feel like that there was a clear line of sight between us and them. So for me, my role within the IOCDF immediately became, at least in my mind, community building, further build on what they've already built. I don't want anybody to feel like they can't pick up the phone and call the IOCDF and they can't get a friendly voice to answer whatever questions they need, whether it's advocacy opportunities, whether it's help, finding clinical resources, whatever it is, that's what I wanted. And that's why, we've worked so hard over the last 5 years now to build this advocacy program, which came from a place of wanting to just create opportunities for everyone to advocate. And be able to, like Alexandra's talking about, is have a platform to release these amazing amounts of energy. You go to the conference, everybody's like, I want to help. And to your original question, Darlene, where you said what was surprising, I will tell you what was most surprising for me was that I've yet to find anybody with OCD that's like, nah, I don't want to help anyone, or related disorders, or that's been like, nah, I'm good. I'll just like every single individual with OCD or related disorder, whether they're ready or not to, has been like, I don't want people to have go through what do I have to do? Where can I sign up? It may not be on a national level, but like everybody is the energy around advocacy and passion for advocacy is so huge within this community. Like my main mission became, how can I support whatever foundation I align with? And in this case, the IOCDF, harness that energy.
Yes.
Because that's the organism that's going to move mountains. That's the organism that's going to make a spectacular difference. And that was the thing that surprised me most. So being able to capture that passion, that energy, that desire for change is huge. The other thing I will tell you is, the other thing that I have learned through advocacy and honestly through the community is I like to scream. That's my thing. It's like, I want to talk. I want people to hear me, but I've also learned, and I've not always been the best at this, at listening. And listening for me has allowed me to become a better advocate, to learn that I don't know everything. In fact, I don't know most things. And I see, and I quickly want to tell this story because it's pertinent to this conversation, but I see Valerie Andrews on here, who's a lead advocate, an amazing advocate at that. And, I found Valerie at a San Francisco conference and look, we know the diversity. We need to work on diversity in this community. It just isn't where it needs to be. We need to get the word out for all the reasons that we've talked about.
Yep.
So I saw Valerie at a conference and I literally tackled her and her husband and I'm like, we got to talk.
Yeah.
But what happened in that conversation was, I realized about my privilege, and I also learned what I didn't know and nor what I'd even thought of. And I gave myself compassion around not knowing it, but at the same time. So when I talked to Valerie for the very first time, I had never heard that there's a stigma within the Black or BIPOC or Latinx community. She told me for the first time, I remember tearing up with her, that, in the church or in her community, why I can't be comfortable saying I have a mental illness when I'm already barely comfortable being Black in this community.
Yeah.
And the double stigma. I'd never heard of the double stigma. I didn't even know that was a thing. And being able to listen to her story and the power of that story really changed the trajectory of my advocacy. Because I'm like, we have to work on this. But I didn't know. And so that's a other huge thing, is like learning about the diverse communities, the marginalized community, understanding what the needs are, and understanding how I can support, not how and I can help. I can join you in the fight, right? I want to be with you, together with you. You tell me, I don't necessarily know everything, and I don't, but I want to at least put myself out there. Maybe I make a mistake, maybe I don't, but I want to create a better world. And Valerie was such a huge proponent of me understanding that world even existed. And then from there, talk on. So that's my. I'll even mute myself out of your protection.
Stop, Ethan. You don't have to mute yourself. So I like what you said, and we kind of had a conversation about this prior to us going live. And there's this Venn diagram. I joked about us having this Venn diagram. And he was like, he's making comments about his OCD community, and I'm not a part of that, but I can participate in advocacy up to a point. And so I described it as a Venn diagram, where in that Venn diagram, you and I both exist in the middle. But then there's a part of the circle where only I should be speaking. And then that part is where you noticed that only Valerie should be speaking, because only Valerie can speak to her experience. But you can support her. You can support her in the same way I was supporting you. But when you started talking specifically about the OCD community, I just went on ahead and stepped back, because that is advocacy. And that is the perfect example of allyship as well. Because that is, to your point about numbers and using and harnessing that energy. That is how we exist in an advocacy space. We learn where the Venn diagram crosses, and then we learn where it's separate. Because there are some people that we should uplift their voice. That's why this is called advocacy, lifting every voice. There is a time where all of our voice can be raised to the mountains, to the skies, to the galaxies. And then there's some times where some of us should be quiet. And it's not right or wrong. It's how advocacy moves forward. And I appreciate you bringing that into this space and in this conversation, because I think it's powerful and it's important. And I think it's important from an individual space. I definitely think it's important from a community space, and is most important from an institutional space. Because when we start talking about what is showing up in IOCDF around diversity and what isn't there, that's where we come in from an institutional lens, where some of us can speak up and some of us can support. Right. And it's all of our presence. It's our numbers. It's our bodies. That is the impact. Alex, I saw you nodding. I feel like you're going to jump in there. You're ready.
I am ready. I am. I think, like I said, last diversity roundtable, the biggest parts of advocacy that I think people miss sometimes, or that they're not aware of, are that we make mistakes. Like Ethan said, we don't know everything. And that a good advocate listens more than they speak. because we learn from everybody else. We learn from each other, other advocates, our community. And there are times when other people's voices need to be heard more than ours. And if we're good advocates, then we don't want to just lift up the people like us. We want to lift up the people who are less privileged than us. For me, it's not a good community if everybody isn't being supported and everybody isn't being lifted up. And I think that's so important not to miss, that just because I'm a Latinx advocate, right, doesn't mean that I can't want a Black queer person to have access to treatment, or, a person who is autistic. It's not just about me, it's about everybody else. And there are other people more marginalized than us who need voices as well.
Yes. And I love that inclusivity, because that's what we're talking about. And to add on top of that, we want it to be equitable, right? We want to talk about, and if we connect back to our IOCD or our OCD community, we know that the resources that are available to the OCD community, when we look at, as you pointed out, Alex, research, when we talk about clinical accessibility, when we talk about insurance, when we talk about qualified clinicians, right? We can keep going, right? We can keep going. There's enough to be done where all of our voices can be harnessed in some space, whether it's about diversity and equity from a racial standpoint or just from a mental health standpoint, because the stigma exists everywhere, but it's the differences that exist, and adds to why, to Alex's point, all voices we want to raise all voices. So we're not overlooking anything, because we're all in the same fight. We're trying to get more people trained, to Mimi's point, to Ethan's point, right? After you've been through 10 clinicians, you kind of don't want to do that. You want to keep people from having to go through that, right? For providers who are interested in doing this work, and advocates, and those in the community who are parents, who are loved ones, you just want to be able to go out and get help for your loved ones. And there are barriers to that we're still fighting to this day. And so that's where we all align. And we do use that central focus, right, to say, this is our community and this is what we're fighting for. And I go back to Ethan's things. We're talking about accessibility. We're talking about education. We're talking about efficacy, right? We're talking about affordability. Wasn't that one of the A's? I think it was. It was sticking in my head. But that those are our foundation. And I think it's interesting, because I think this is a great question to ask if I'm tapping into these four as they stuck in my head. For you all, what might you recommend as a starting place, right? Like, what might be the thing that you can say if you had an audience? Well, you do have an audience. This is your audience. Act like you're up on a podium. What do you say? What do you say about what you've seen that has worked and what you're currently working through? Because advocacy work never stops, right? What would you say to those things?
So I'll go, because it's fresh on my mind and I don't want to lose it real quick. No problem. So I'm going to say I have an amazing therapist. He is the best, most accepting, validating, just kind-hearted, privileged white male. But we work together well because he acknowledges his privilege. He accepts me. He affirms my identity, and he creates a safe space for me. And that is something that has been incredibly wonderful for me, and is not something that I received before him in 15 some odd years of searching. And that is one thing that I can hone in on, that I want for every BIPOC person of color, queer person. I want someone who will accept them the way they are. So I have really focused some of my advocacy on trying to reach therapists from a point of lived experience with OCD and related disorders, to try to aid them in becoming more, quote unquote, culturally competent. And I just really dislike that phrase, because it does not encompass everything that you need to do to be a good, accepting, validating human being and create a really safe space for someone who may have intersecting identities that you don't know about. And so I've started a Dear Therapist with my friend, the T on OCD, Yasmin, on Instagram, a little series where we write to therapists about things that we would like to see or that we would have liked in therapy. And I also had a wonderful conversation with my friend Katie about bringing some of these ideas to therapists themselves. So
Yes.
we'll see how that goes.
Wow, that is very powerful. And I'm hearing a theme. I'm hearing this theme about and I love the focus as a clinician, right? As a person who's trains and treats and all those wonderful things, researches, all that stuff. I find it very powerful because it addresses what Mimi said before. The accessibility, Ethan's word. I know I'm still in it, Ethan. The accessibility to these types of resources, not just for those who are seeking treatment, but how can one seek treatment if there's no one out there to provide it? So yeah, that's amazing. I wish we had that. Like we could like put it up, or I don't know, maybe we can get that and we can promote that for you. I think that's really cool. I think it's a voice. If we're talking about lifting every voice, I think that's a voice that many folks with OCD would love to have an outlet, because that's validation if nothing else. So wonderful. Kudos. All right, who's taking the floor next?
I'll
Go
jump
ahead,
in.
Mimi. Yeah.
I think that there needs to be better marketing and more publicity around memoirs about OCD, because I think people, or like celebrities, sometimes will like say they have OCD and then it's like, oh, I struggled so much to wash my hands and stuff like that, which is of course a valid hand washing thing. But talking about different themes in media portrayals, in memoirs that are more popular, I think that's really important. And also, like what Alex said about, I think lived experience therapists is really important for OCD, because it can feel really invalidating when a therapist says, just do ERP, and they don't understand what it's like to feel the distress. And I think it gives a lot of compassion when you have someone who's been there.
And to add to that point, one of the things that was relevant to our training is the foundation of just being compassionate and flexible. So as a clinician who's been trained in ERP and very CBT trained, you are trained to be by the book. And the reason for that, from a research perspective, as you know, Mimi, right, because you're in training now, it's like you were taught, like it is ingrained like this, like you are taught, if you want there to be any movement and symptoms, you got to do it this way. Except, as we know, the limitations to many manualized therapies is that it doesn't account for all of the other aspects of a presentation, right? It doesn't account for the depression that may come up. It doesn't account for the comorbidity of other things. And so, to Alex's point, what we're hoping to do in the training, and at least in my lived experience as a clinician, the flexibility is a skill set, right? So it's not, you want the benefit of lived experience therapists, but you also want the current therapists who we have access to right now until we change that number. And I'm saying this because this is how I think about Black clinicians. Like in my mind, I want Black people with OCD to have access to a Black clinician, except that's not the ratio in which this is going to go. At the rate that Black clinicians are joining this field, that's not going to happen. So then my lens has then shifted to, okay, I want to work with white clinicians who are interested in evolving and growing and developing in that space, who are aware of their privilege, who are affirming and feel comfortable affirming. And because those are the words that Alex used. This white man who is aware of his privilege is affirming. That's what people care about, the compassion. And so it's part of hopefully the trainers who are listening. It's really instilling in future clinicians that yes, you have this manual, but the skill set is in that adaptability, that flexibility. How do I work with the entire client? Yes, there's this manual, but this client exists outside of their symptoms. And that's the field of psychology, right? And again, Mimi, if you don't know this, you'll see it. There's like this shift in psychology where we're moving away from symptoms and we're looking at the transdiagnostic presentation of things that just permeate through other areas, right? So it's not just your symptom, it's your functioning, it's other aspects of it, right? So that's what you're thinking about. So hopefully we're moving with Alex's work, listening to the clinicians, and your work, working to create trainings for the clinicians. We're moving to meeting the clients where they are, and they're saying, hey, I am not just my OCD. And the clinicians are saying, I see you, I can affirm you in all of your identities and all of your existence. That is advocacy. All right, Ethan, you're up.
I don't know. I have so much on my mind. I'm just listening. You know, honestly, y'all are amazing, and I think this little group really beautifully represents the importance of advocating from your passion.
Yes.
Because at the end of the day, you know, I get asked so many times, how can I advocate? How can I advocate? I want to advocate, but where do I start? You know, and the reality is, to your point, Dr. Davis, is like we all start sort of it. We all have this kernel in common, this common humanity of OCD, related disorder, whatever it is, that common struggle. We're all there, and that's how we all relate.
Yep.
But then we've all touched on completely different areas.
Yep.
And the idea is to like all come back to that middle. But if all of us are not kind of brave enough to go off on our own voyages and journeys to talk about these things, then we don't accomplish. There's so much to accomplish. There's so much to accomplish. I mean, like we've touched on the tip of a very large, big iceberg, spear, whatever you want to call it, you know? And the reality is, if we all focused on just one thing, that would be great that we made a change over 100 years in that one thing, but there'd be a million other things that need help and that need resources and passion and advocacy and so much. And so, like, you know, Alexandra speaking from a very specific point of view, and Mimi speaking from a very specific point of view, and you're speaking from a very specific point of view, and I'm speaking for a very specific point of view. And it's empowering all of us to advocate from our position of passion to then all one day meet up in the middle, where there's this trail behind us where we've walked in everybody's footsteps and who came before us, and they're walking in our footsteps, and we're all walking in each other's footsteps, right? That we've carved this massive amount of change to where it can be from, you know, it's funny. I always say, I wish it were the 3 A's, but it's not, you know, affordability, accessibility, and effectiveness. I'm like, oh, that darn E word, darn it. Because, like, you know, for marketing reasons, 3 A's would be so much better.
It would be.
You know, but it's like, yeah, sure. That's at the, you know, the crux of it. But then you get into all the other conversations, all the necessary conversations that we're having, like tonight's conversation. And that's why it's also important to advocate from a place of support, and to be able to support, from a place of passion, and be able to support people that want to advocate in a place of passion, and be able to support those passions and foster and nurture the best we possibly can, and water those seeds so they can grow, and at least create more seeds for other people to join, as Mimi and Alexandra and you and me have seen, that like you plant a seed and other people start to want to water that seed. I know we're coming short on time. So the last thing I'll say is, like, I always like to advocate from a place of positivity. That's my own style. That's what I believe in. I'm not commenting on anybody else's advocacy, but for me, like, I always want, whether the message is painful, hard to hear, stigmatizing, you know, talking about, like, you know, the suicidality rate in OCD or whatever message I'm imparting, I always want there to be a sense of hope and help at the end of that message. Like, yes, this is a problem. Yes, we're more likely to be this, or that we're less alone, or we feel shame and guilt, or whatever it is. But I never want the message to end there. Even if it's just a post, I always want there to be a yes, but there is a path forward. And it may not be easy, and it may not be the obvious one, but we'll find it. We'll find it together. Whatever it has to be, we'll find it together. Okay, all you.
No, I love that. I love that. And if we're kind of zoning in and trying to narrow it down as best as we can, to your point, because this is like a castle size. Like, if you think about castles and all the million rooms, that's what I think advocacy is. It's like a bazillion rooms. And we're just like at the front door. We just kind of walked into the castle. Because that's what advocacy is. It's like, you have so many ways that you can go about this. And that's what I hope the listeners hear. That there are so many ways to go about it. And there is no right or wrong. It's your way. That's the message. It is absolutely your way. And trust me, and I'm about to say a church phrase, because this is what happens in Black church. When 2 or more are gathered in his name, that's what they tell you, right? Then you're having church. That is the belief, right? And so that's what I think of when I think of advocacy. Is it 2 or more or 3 or more? I think is it 2 or more or 3 or more? I don't know. But if you have another person, to your point about your story with the family and the young woman, and then the young man who was seeking treatment, like, it's just that one connection. That is your advocacy. That is how far you have to move. You don't have to go to DC. You don't have to get on the internet. You can literally go outside your front door. You can connect with a parent in the PTA. You can ask your neighbor to have a play date. Like, just the simple things, right? Because if you happen to have a child, and I'm very parent focused, that's also my side gig, my baby. But it's all about finding ways, and that's just a whole nother conversation that we don't have time for. But how all of the ways that we go about navigating these different institutions, and we go about advocating for the needs of individuals, but also entire groups, right? So Mimi represents a graduate student who is also seeking treatment herself, right? So those are two different identities who have a different level of advocacy, right? Because we're advocating for effective training, right? Full-blown access to, the type of therapy that will meet the needs of the actual client. We have clients who are saying these are our needs, and you two over here, Ethan and Alex, they're completely different. In the same way, Mimi is different, right? These are all different voices, and your advocacy looks completely different. And I hope that's what people hear, that advocacy is tailored. There are big picture advocacy experiences, and there are very much small pictures, very much mustard seed is what I like to call them. And the few things that have come out from all of you is that advocacy looks like patience, compassion, tenacity, listening, and hope. Those 5. I'm going to repeat them: patience, compassion, tenacity, listening, and hope. Now, I don't know where that's going to be plastered. I don't even know. But I think that those premises are amazing places to start, because I think it gives us the experience. It gives us the platform. It gives us the example, right? And to close out with what Ethan was saying about instilling hope, hopefully these experiences have fostered a sense of hope. What we didn't get to talk about is some of the challenges, and I don't know. I mean, we sprinkled them in there, and I don't want to scare anybody away, but I think we made an excellent point about the challenges of it in the way that it can be frustrating, but it can also be rewarding. It could be accountability for you, which can be uncomfortable, but it can be accountability for someone else, which is also supportive. So we have this full grasp of an experience that exists in the advocacy world. And so with that, I would ask you, what would you all like to share in closing for our audience? I know it's like,
I'll go. So since, going off of the theme of this panel, I would like to say, if you're thinking about advocating, or even if you don't want to advocate on a public level, I would encourage you to do whatever advocacy feels comfortable for you, whether it's talking to someone who has misused OCD in the public, or talking to your family more about it, or if you're not comfortable, going public with your OCD, just doing research. There are so many ways to be your own private advocate if you want, and they are all important. They all matter.
Yeah. Thank you, Alex. That's a good point. Advocacy exists in 3 spaces: self, the individual, meaning the individual community, and then the systems. That's where we talked about the institution. So just keep that in mind. Wherever you land, it's your world. All right. Who else?
I think just that it gets better. And even when there are lapses, you can still hop back on the ERP train. And it's just, you're always kind of moving sort of upwards. Like once you learn something about your OCD, I feel like you don't go back necessarily to like that not knowing. So like even if you're doing the same behaviors, you have new knowledge to help you through that. So it's really exciting and it gets better.
Excellent point. That is an excellent point that I always remind people. And that's a general therapeutic point. People, please know that if you find yourself saying, oh, I've backtracked, no such thing. You have a new context. You have a new lens on life. You have new information. So that is a perfect thing to leave with someone who's listening, who might feel like they're on the fence about something. And as it applies to you reaching out for help, but also as it applies to you speaking up for yourself and advocating for yourself, your needs, or the needs of your community. So yes, wonderful. Thank you, Mimi. Ethan, you'll close us out.
I was just gonna add, sorry. Gotcha. Yeah, I would just Ethan out right now. So no, we're great. I'm gonna. No, you're good. No, what are you talking about? This is amazing. I wouldn't leave this for anything. I'm gonna say the spiel. I'm gonna say this and then jump off to go to the other stream before it shuts down. But my quick thing is you can advocate wherever you are right now. And that's the important thing, is that, and advocacy doesn't have to take place at the stage of ultimate wellness, right? It can take place anywhere, and it can take. And now that doesn't mean that if you're struggling and you're struggling really bad, maybe it isn't the best time to talk about your story or share. But that doesn't mean that you can't advocate. How many people on Instagram have these amazing, robust accounts that didn't reveal who they were for years, but we all followed them because we loved what they were saying. And they were powerful, made an impact and a difference. And then later they came out, and a penny for your intrusive thought, perfect example. We didn't know who they were for a few years, and they came out. My point is, and what reminded me of this is Margaret Sissons if you know Riley's Wish. Riley, it reminded me because Riley was somebody that I thought was the strongest human being alive, because I started advocating when I was better. And I thought, and Riley, up until, God bless him, he passed, he was advocating even at his worst. He was at those conferences, sharing his story, helping others, doing research, and like the kind of strength it takes to advocate when you are in intense amounts of pain, to me, is mind-blowing and just so freaking inspiring, And so it's so important to note that wherever you are in this moment, you can advocate. Write a poem.
Yes.
Maybe submit it, maybe not. Write for yourself, all the way down to you can parent alive or anything in between. But advocacy doesn't mean one thing. It doesn't mean doing something on a national level, and it doesn't mean nothing. It can be really anything. So whatever you're passionate about and wherever you are in the moment, be an advocate. I have to run, but thank you so much for having me. You were awesome. Love you both. Love you all. Love you both. Just you and Mimi. Alex, you're on your own. Love you guys.
Hey.
Bye.
Stop it. I know.
Bye, Ethan.
Bye, Ethan. See you
Bye.
soon. And with that, we're going to go ahead and close out for the night. If we missed any questions, we're sorry. Please feel free to submit them to us. We can follow up via email. Would like to close by thanking our panelists who've done such an amazing job and contributed so much to this conversation. I would also like to extend an opening for you all we want to hear from you about your stories, about your experience, about anything that's applied to any of the diversity roundtables we've done. I call those community collections. So I would love to collect your experiences so that we can use them and put them into action. We want to hear your voice. It's important to have your voice lifted up. And then also ideas for inclusivity, right? So any suggestions, recommendations, tell us your thoughts about ways that we can lift every voice, bring every voice, every experience to the table. We can't always talk about them all at once because it's just too much to talk about, as Ethan pointed out. We could sit and talk about advocacy all day. It just takes so many shapes, but we don't have a lot of time. And then lastly, we'll ask you to show up to our next diversity roundtable. They're held every other month on the third Tuesdays at 6:00. So we welcome you back, and we look forward to sharing more of our experience and insight with you. Thank you again to our panelists, and you all have a good evening. We're out.